The dust hung thick in the air like a golden curtain, coating everything in sight with a fine layer of grit. The afternoon sun burned over the Texas plains, and Jackson Wade stood on the wooden platform of the Clearwater railway station, hat pulled low, boots planted firm. At 32, he'd spent half his life driving cattle across the wide frontier, sleeping under open skies and waking to the cry of coyotes. His hands were hard as leather, his face lined by wind and sun. But that day, even a man like him felt uneasy. The 3:15 train from Kansas City was due any moment, and it carried his future with it. Behind him, Clearwater was just a handful of weathered buildings. A saloon, a church, a general store, and a few houses baked by the Texas heat. Civilization was creeping westward, but it still moved slow, and Jackson liked it that way. He'd built his ranch 5 miles north of town. Strong fences, a good herd, clean water. The only thing missing was a woman to share it with. Everyone in town had reminded him of that lately. "You can't live out there alone forever, Jack," old Mrs. Harriet had scolded after church last Sunday. "A man needs a wife to make a home, someone quiet, gentle, and proper." So after months of letters through his cousin Martha back east, he had agreed to an arrangement, a mail-order bride. Her name was Eleanor Prescott, 23 years old, educated, modest, and known for her calm and ladylike manners. The perfect wife, Martha had written, for a cowboy ready to settle down. When the train whistle cut through the air, Jackson's pulse jumped. Black smoke curled above the tracks as the locomotive roared into view, wheels screeching against steel. His stomach knotted tighter than it had during any cattle stampede. Passengers spilled out, businessmen in city coats, a family with squalling children, 2 painted saloon girls, but his eyes searched for only one face. Then he saw her. She stepped down from the train like she belonged on a ballroom floor, not a dusty platform. Her traveling dress was deep blue, buttoned neatly to the throat. A small bonnet framed dark hair swept up in careful waves. Every inch of her spoke of refinement and grace, everything he'd hoped for. But when she lifted her head, he caught her eyes, green, bright as new spring grass. And in them, behind the proper posture and polite manners, there was something untamed. A spark, like a Mustang that had learned to wear a saddle but never forgot the wild. Their eyes met across the platform. She didn't look away, didn't blush or lower her gaze. Instead, she studied him, steady, curious, as if measuring what kind of man she'd agreed to marry. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. Not shy, not nervous, almost amused. "Mr. Wade?" Her voice carried clear and calm through the noise, with a smooth Eastern accent but an undercurrent of confidence. "Yes, ma'am." "Miss Prescott," he said, stepping forward and lifting his hat. "Eleanor," she corrected, extending a gloved hand. Her handshake was firm, unexpectedly firm. "I trust you received my letter about the arrangements?" "Yes, ma'am. Reverend Morrison's expecting us." His voice sounded rougher than he intended. Talking about marriage felt strange when her scent of lavender water made his head swim. She looked around the little town, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "It's smaller than I imagined." "It's growing," Jackson said quickly, feeling oddly defensive. "Got a new schoolhouse last year." Doc Henley built himself a proper surgery. "Very progressive," she said with a small, unreadable smile. Before he could decide if she was teasing, she nodded toward the baggage car. "Shall we collect my trunk? I assume you're eager to complete the formalities." The way she said formalities made his collar feel tight. Her belongings were modest, a single trunk and a carpet bag. As the station boy helped load them onto Jackson's wagon, he noticed how she watched everything around her. The saloon across the street, the cowboys lounging against posts, the town women whispering behind gloved hands. Eleanor Prescott saw everything and missed nothing. The ride to the church was quiet. She sat straight beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap, but Jackson could sense tension under her calm surface. "Your cousin Martha spoke highly of you," she said finally. "Martha's prone to exaggeration," he replied. "I'm just a cowboy with a bit of land." "She said you were honest," Eleanor said, turning to look him squarely in the eyes. "That matters more than the size of your herd." Her words struck him harder than expected. There was something in her gaze, steady, fearless, that made him uneasy in a way no outlaw ever had. The wedding was short. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony in the small white church, with only Mrs. Morrison and the town clerk as witnesses. Eleanor spoke her vows clear and sure, her eyes never leaving Jackson's face. When the time came for the kiss, she tilted her chin up, not shyly but with quiet command. Her lips were soft, but her composure made it feel as if she was granting permission rather than accepting affection. Afterward, they signed the register. Her handwriting was beautiful, flowing and confident beside his rough scrawl. Mrs. Morrison handed Eleanor a bundle of biscuits for the journey. "For your new home," she said, her voice kind but pitying, as though the young bride were heading toward hardship. The sun was setting when they left town. The prairie glowed gold and crimson, the wind carrying the scent of dry grass. "It's not much," Jackson said as his ranch came into view, a sturdy log house, barn, corral, and miles of empty land. "But it's solid. Roof doesn't leak." Eleanor studied it, then surprised him with a small, genuine smile. "It's perfect. You built this yourself?" "With help," he said. "Took near 2 years." When he helped her down from the wagon, her body brushed against his, and he caught that same lavender scent, mixed now with something earthier, wilder. Inside, the house was plain but tidy. A stone fireplace, simple furniture, a kitchen corner, and a door leading to the bedroom. He'd tried to make it ready, but suddenly it looked rough and bare under her polished gaze. "I'll start supper," Eleanor said at once, removing her gloves. "You do have food, I hope?" "Yes, ma'am. Bacon, beans, cornmeal." Quote. She moved about the small kitchen like she already belonged there. Quick, efficient, confident. Jackson stood for a moment, watching her. She wasn't the shy, quiet woman he'd imagined. There was something stronger under that fine exterior. By the time he returned from the barn, the smell of frying bacon filled the air. They ate mostly in silence. Her eyes met his often, steady and unreadable. When supper was done, she cleared the table, washed the dishes, and finally turned to face him in the flickering lamplight. The open bedroom door waited behind her. Jackson cleared his throat. "I know this is sudden. If you need time to—" She stepped closer, her eyes glittering like green fire. "Mr. Wade," she said softly, "you think you married a quiet woman?" He nodded uncertainly, her lips curved. "Tell me, what kind of quiet woman answers an ad to marry a stranger and ride 1,000 miles into the frontier?" Before he could speak, she laid her hand on his chest. Her touch burned through his shirt. "Cowboy wanted a quiet wife," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "Got a wild one instead." The lamplight flickered as she led him toward the bedroom, and Jackson Wade realized that everything he thought he knew about women and about himself was about to change. Outside, coyotes howled at the rising moon, their cries echoing across the wide, empty prairie. Inside, a different kind of wildness was just beginning. The morning sun streamed through the cabin window, soft and golden. Jackson Wade lay still, watching dust motes drift in the light. His muscles ached in pleasant ways he didn't dare name. The smell of lavender and wood smoke lingered in the air, and beside him, Eleanor slept, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. Even in sleep, she looked nothing like the timid bride he'd imagined. She claimed the bed as if it were her rightful kingdom. For a long moment, he just watched her breathe, wondering what exactly he'd invited into his quiet life. When he tried to slip away to start the morning chores, her eyes opened instantly, alert and sharp. "Running off already, cowboy?" she asked, voice low and husky. "Cattle don't feed themselves," he said, reaching for his shirt. She stretched lazily, smiling like a cat. "Then I'd better get dressed too." An hour later, Jackson led the horses from the barn and nearly dropped the bridle. Eleanor stepped out of the house. No bonnet, no blue dress, no lace. She wore a split riding skirt, boots, and a simple blouse rolled at the sleeves. More like a ranch hand than the proper lady who'd stepped off the train. "Where in the world did you get that outfit?" he asked. "I told you," she said, mounting the corral fence with ease. "You made assumptions. Which horse is mine?" "Yours," he blinked. "These aren't stable ponies. They're working stock, half wild, most of them." "That bay mare," she said, nodding toward one with sharp eyes and good legs. "She's got sense. What's her name?" "Rosalind, but she's spirited, needs a firm hand." Eleanor was already inside the fence, walking toward the horse. The mare shifted, wary. Eleanor moved slow, murmuring softly, her hand outstretched. Within minutes, Rosalind's ears flicked forward, and the woman's palm rested on her neck. "Bring me a saddle," she said without looking back. Jackson hesitated, then fetched one, curiosity battling disbelief. She saddled up with practiced motions, then swung into the seat with a smoothness that spoke of experience. Rosalind danced sideways, testing her. Eleanor sat deep, heels down, reins steady. "Well," she said, grinning down at him, "are you coming, or should I check the herd myself?" Quote, he mounted up, still shaking his head. "You can ride." "I told you, I wasn't raised in a cage." They rode out together into the open prairie, where sunlight turned the grass to gold. The herd grazed in the distance, tails flicking at flies. Eleanor looked across the land with eyes that missed nothing. "Good stock," she said. "Longhorns crossed with something heavier. Hereford, maybe?" Jackson stared at her. "How'd you know that?" "My uncle bred horses in Kentucky. I spent summers on his farm." She smiled faintly. "He taught me to ride, though Aunt nearly fainted every time I came home with a torn skirt." They spent the morning checking the herd. When they found a cow with a festering wound, Eleanor didn't flinch. "Screw worm," Jackson said. "We'll have to rope her and treat it." Before he could reach for his lariat, Eleanor snatched it from his saddle, built a loop, and sent it flying. It wasn't perfect, but it held. "Where the devil did you learn that?" he asked, startled. "My uncle taught me that too. Said I had good wrists." She laughed, the sound carrying across the open land. They worked side by side, treating the wound. The cow bawled, but they finished quick and clean. Jackson couldn't stop watching her. Sleeves rolled, eyes fierce, dust streaking her face, alive in a way few people ever were. By the time they rode back for noon, he'd stopped trying to fit her into the mold he'd built in his head. On the way home, they passed the Hendricks ranch. Mary Hendricks stood by her wash line, mouth falling open as she saw Eleanor astride the bay mare. "Morning, Mary," Jackson called. "Morning," she said stiffly, eyes flicking over Eleanor. "Mrs. Wade." "Please call me Eleanor," she said warmly, but with steel underneath. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Quote. Mary's lips thinned. "It's unladylike to ride astride in your condition. Folks will talk." "Then let them talk," Eleanor said simply. "Better they talk about me than about someone who can't defend herself." Jackson almost laughed aloud at the look on Mary's face. They rode on, the silence between them full of shared amusement. "She's not wrong," Jackson said finally. "People will talk." "Let them," Eleanor replied. "I didn't cross 1,000 miles to live by someone else's rules." That afternoon, she insisted on learning to mend fences. Her soft hands blistered, but she didn't quit. When Jackson told her she'd done enough, she fixed him with a glare. "Would you stop if you were tired?" Quote. He had no answer. Days passed, and life settled into a strange rhythm. They worked together from dawn to dusk, branding, hauling water, fixing gates, and by night they found each other again in the dark, passion burning as bright as any fire. She wasn't just his wife. She was a storm that had blown into his life and refused to pass. Then the drought came. By June, the grass was brittle as straw, crunching underfoot. The creek shrank to a muddy thread and the air shimmered with heat. Every morning they hauled barrels of water from the river 5 miles away. Eleanor's skirts clung to her legs with sweat and dust, but she never complained. The other ranchers, Wives watched from their wagons, fans fluttering in disapproval. "That's man's work," one said loudly. "Then it's a good thing she married a woman who doesn't care about such nonsense," Jackson replied without thinking. Eleanor shot him a smile that made the brutal day worth it. But things grew worse. Calves died, cows too weak to stand. Jackson had to shoot 3 in 1 week. The sound echoed across the dry land like a curse. One evening, he found Eleanor sitting by the dry creek bed, tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. "That calf today?" she whispered. "She had such beautiful eyes." He knelt beside her. "You could go back east. No one would blame you." Her head snapped up. "Is that what you want? To be rid of your troublesome wife?" "No," he said quickly. "No, I don't." "Then don't insult me by thinking I'd run. I chose this life. I chose you." Her voice trembled with emotion, fierce and raw. "I won't let a little drought chase me off." "A little drought," he repeated, half smiling despite the pain. Together, they began planning, rotating the herd, digging deeper wells, selling a few cattle early. Eleanor's ideas were sharp, practical, and bold. "Half a herd alive is better than a full one dead," she said. When Jackson met with a greedy rancher who tried to cheat him, it was Eleanor who coolly demanded cash on the spot, saving them from a trap. August came, hotter than ever. Fires burned on the horizon. Dust choked the sky. Eleanor's face had grown thinner, her hands calloused, but her spirit never broke. Then, one night, the wind began to roar, not hot and dry this time, but heavy, electric. Jackson stepped outside and smelled rain. "Is that?" Eleanor started, breath-catching. The first drop hit the porch like a promise, then another, then hundreds. Within minutes, the sky opened up, and the prairie drank greedily. They ran outside, laughing, letting the rain soak them to the bone. Eleanor threw her arms around him and kissed him hard under the storm. "See?" she gasped. "We just had to outlast it." He kissed her back, tasting rain and dust and hope. And for the first time in months, Jackson Wade believed they just might survive this wild life together. The first light of dawn broke across the Texas sky, soft and gold against the wet earth. Jackson Wade stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching steam rise from the soaked ground after the long-awaited rain. The air smelled clean again, of mud, grass, and promise. Behind him, Eleanor was humming softly as she cooked breakfast. 3 months had passed since the drought had broken, and though the land was still healing, life had begun to feel steady again. The herd was smaller, the water barrels were full, and laughter had returned to the little house. That morning she joined him on the porch with 2 tin cups of coffee. Her hands were rough now, the soft eastern skin long replaced by the calluses of a rancher's wife. But to Jackson, she had never looked more beautiful. "How long since the last trouble?" she asked, settling beside him. "Too long," he said with a small smile. "Almost feels like we've earned the quiet." She looked out across the horizon, green eyes bright beneath the brim of his spare hat. "Maybe we have. Or maybe quiet just means another storm's coming." Jackson chuckled. "You always were the cautious one." "Careful, cowboy. You're the one who married trouble." He grinned, taking her hand. "Wouldn't change a thing." Weeks passed peacefully. The days were filled with work and laughter. Eleanor had learned every inch of the land, and the men who once whispered about her now tipped their hats with respect. Still, one morning in October, she rode into the barn with a strange look on her face. "Jackson," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He set down his bridle. "What is it?" Quote, "I went to see Doc Henley yesterday while you were out with the herd." She hesitated, then smiled in that small, trembling way he'd never seen before. "I'm gonna have a baby." For a long second, he just stared at her, his brain refusing to catch up with his heart. Then he laughed, rough and surprised. "A baby?" Quote, she nodded. "A baby, yours and mine." Jackson stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The scent of dust and lavender filled his lungs, and for a moment, the whole world felt right. But soon, the old worries crept in. "You'll have to be careful," he said. "No more breaking horses or hauling feed. I'll take care of the heavy work." Her smile faded. "Jackson, I can't just sit inside for months." "You're carrying our child," he said gently. "You need rest." Quote. She folded her arms. "And you need to understand, I'm not made of glass. I'll be careful, but I won't stop living." He sighed, recognizing that look in her eyes, the same wild spark that had drawn him from the start. "All right," he said finally. "Just promise me you'll listen to your body." "I will," she said, touching his face. "Together, remember?" By the time the leaves turned brown, everyone in Clearwater knew Eleanor Wade was expecting. And everyone had an opinion about how she should behave. The women in church whispered behind their fans. "Maybe this will settle her down," Mary Hendricks said one Sunday. "A baby changes everything." Eleanor heard every word but held her head high. She'd faced worse than gossip. At home, she adjusted as best she could. She gave up the hardest work but still insisted on mending tack, tending the garden, and keeping the books. When Jackson tried to lift a saddle for her one day, she swatted his hand. "If I stop working, I'll go crazy." Winter came early that year. The nights were cold, the wind sharp. One February evening, as snow began to fall, Eleanor stirred awake with a sharp cry. "Jackson!" she gasped, gripping his arm. "The baby's coming." He sat up at once. "Now? It's too soon." Another pain ripped through her, silencing his protest. The storm outside was howling, snow thick against the windows. Riding to town was impossible. "You have to fetch the doctor," she said through clenched teeth. "I can't leave you, not in this weather." "Then you'll have to deliver the baby yourself," she whispered. Fear gripped him tighter than any bandit's hold. But there was no choice. He gathered towels, hot water, and whiskey, and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. Hours passed like years. Eleanor fought through every contraction with the same fierce will she'd brought to every battle. Jackson held her hand, whispered comfort, wiped her face. Finally, after one last cry, the cabin was filled with a new sound, a baby's sharp, beautiful wail. "It's a girl," Jackson choked out, his hands trembling as he placed the tiny bundle on Eleanor's chest. Eleanor laughed and sobbed at once. "She's perfect!" But then Jackson saw the blood, too much of it, and fear returned like a knife to the heart. Eleanor's face had gone pale, her eyes fluttered. "Stay with me," he said, pressing his hand over hers. "Ellie, please." Her voice was barely a whisper. Her name should be Hope, because that's what she is. Jackson refused to let her go. He sat beside her through the night, holding both his girls as the storm raged. When morning came, the snow began to ease, and so did her breathing. Doc Henley arrived hours later, astonished to find mother and baby alive. "You did good, son," he said gruffly, "real good." 3 days later, Eleanor opened her eyes fully for the first time. Jackson was beside her, Hope asleep in a basket by the bed. "You scared me half to death," he said. She smiled weakly. "Can't get rid of me that easy, cowboy." He took her hand. "You gave me the world, Ellie. You and her." In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal, though nothing was quite the same. Eleanor still rode, though more carefully now. Hope wrapped tight in a sling against her chest. The other women in town still whispered, but now there was something else in their voices. Respect. One spring morning, Jackson was mending a fence when he heard riders coming fast. 6 of them. He recognized the leader, Jake Morrison, a rustler known from Dodge to Abilene. Eleanor saw them too. She passed the baby to Jackson. "Take her to the root cellar," she said, already reaching for her rifle. He hesitated. "Eleanor." "Go," she said firmly. When the men rode up, Morrison grinned. "Nice spread you've got here, Wade. Thought we'd help ourselves to a few head of cattle. Maybe take a little something else while we're at it." Eleanor stepped into the doorway, rifle aimed steady. "You take one more step, mister, and you'll find out how good my aim is." Morrison's grin faltered. "You wouldn't shoot a man." "Try me," she said. Just then, 2 more gunshots echoed. Not hers. Jackson looked up to see neighbors riding in from both sides. Tom Bennett and Will Patterson, rifles ready. "Looks like you're outnumbered," Jackson said coldly. "Ride out while you still can." Morrison spat in the dust but turned his horse. "This ain't over," he snarled. But it was. Weeks later, the gang was gone, the ranch rebuilt, and the Wade family stronger than ever. Hope learned to walk, and Eleanor laughed more than she had in months. Years passed. The house grew bigger, the herd doubled, and the wild little girl with her mother's eyes learned to ride before she could spell her name. Eleanor often stood on the porch at sunset, Hope at her side, both watching the horizon blaze in colors too bright to name. "Is it true, Mama?" Hope asked one evening, "that Papa wanted a quiet wife?" Eleanor smiled. "He did." Hope giggled. "And what did he get?" Eleanor bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "He got something much better." As the sun dipped low over the prairie, Jackson joined them, wrapping his arms around his wild wife and their even wilder child. The wind moved softly through the grass, and for once all was still, not quiet, but peaceful. Jackson had wanted a gentle life, a quiet partner. What he'd found was fire and courage, laughter and storms, and he wouldn't have traded a single day of it. The West was still wild, but so was love. And in the little ranch house north of Clearwater, both would live on for generations.